Welcome to Soul Centered Conversations. I will be talking to Nakia Diller today. Nakia is my friend. She is a part of my spiritual community. She and I have known each other for a number of years and been part of a coaching program together. So, it's a long road we've been on, and we have a lot of intersections. And today we're going to be talking about some of those intersections. I want to welcome you, Nakia. Thank you for being here. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about you?
Well, thank you for having me, my sister Damali. I'm super grateful to be, in conversation with you in this format. We have known each other for so long. It's been an absolute blessing to watch our journeys together, with our businesses, with going in and out of jobs, leaving jobs, going into jobs, and just like staying connected through it all and having someone to hold that container in that space. And as we navigate through what that looks like. And so I'm just grateful. And in the spiritual community and just, all of that. So it's like you my super soul sister, in many ways. And so thank you for having me, be a part of this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure because, like I said, I think you witnessed a lot of my own evolution. When we started out in Keisha's program, and Keisha Mitchell is a phenomenal coach, and we've been part of her Activate Your Calling, but also Alchemy program. And, I have to just say, like, that Alchemy program was huge for me in taking steps toward my own freedom as an entrepreneur, but as like a person who has a lot of creative offerings still to make in the world. And so, I just recall being a part of that program and kind of witnessing the fact that both of us have kind of been in the nonprofit sector, in the social justice space in that way, and also been in this place of like moving into our own businesses, moving into our own, like, who are we and what are we doing in the world. And I think soul centered conversations is one of the things that came out of my own decision to do more of me. And so I remember we were in the program and you were an entrepreneur at the time. You actually had left a job, and I had been like, "Ooh, look at Nakia, she did that." And at some point, you're like, "I'm going back to work." And I was like, for real? Like, it's almost like this moment where it's like, part, I understand why, those choices get made, and part like, whoa, must have been a big decision. So I wanted
Mhm.
to start there about that moment when you decided to go back to work, um, after taking your leap into your own business. Can you tell us just a little bit about that story?
Yeah. So yeah, when we were in Keisha's alchemy program, at that time I had been a full-time entrepreneur for a few years, for 16, 17, 18, 3 years. And I was, just started my mastermind program, had really started to put the energy and the time into, my coaching business and workshops and just going at it. Wasn't working for anybody. And had a lot of wins and falls as well, like, challenges throughout. But I was committed to making sure that I fulfill that calling. And then within, I think about 3.5 years into it, with the struggles that I was dealing with. I was dealing with financial struggles and, like, the stressors of, like, oh, just being in that grind mode all the time. And even though I'm doing what I love, even though I'm creating the foundation for what I really want to be into, but the way in which I did it wasn't really sustainable. And what ended up happening, I didn't want to go back to work. It was a spiritual download that I received that told me that actually it also was like, it was a manifestation of a desire I had years before. So I had this vision board that had this particular organization on it that I wanted to work for, but I didn't really want to work for them. I wanted to be guest speaker. I wanted to come and do my own thing. But there on my vision board, and literally next to the organization, there's a picture of me speaking. There's a message that says you're hired. And that has been there for years, right? I'm looking at this for years. And so this, I ended up recognizing was a manifestation in the timing where I was no longer vibrating at that I didn't want to go to this job at the time, but when it showed up, it was like, now it's time. And the executive director reached out to me directly and said, we're hiring for this position, we think it would be good for you. And I was like kicking and screaming, like I knew I needed some financial stability. I knew that I was just like, I don't want to go back to work, but I, even knowing that, me trusting spirit, me trusting something beyond me, even with my own decisions and what I want to do. And then I ended up saying, okay, yes. And there's a gospel song called Say Yes. And that song revisited me the month all this was happening. And I had all these breakthroughs. And that song was like getting me to say yes to God. So will you still say yes? And so I said yes. And ended up going back to work. Yeah.
Well, can I say there's so much there because you decided to go back to work. I think when I decided I was leaving a
Yes.
workplace, right? Which is so fascinating because I left this workplace because it just was getting too toxic there for me. And I was like, you know what? For the first time in my life, I'm going to make a decision for me. So I leave. And I had that wild, like, I was in that dream state of like, I'm going to make this work at all costs. I'm going to like get lots of clients. I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm going to be phenomenal. I was like, had my little swag thing going that I was just going to be this amazing uh, kind of entrepreneur that in a year, I was going to be like on top of my game. And it's so funny because looking back, I kind of laugh at myself because I think I was so kind of desperate to get out of there to save myself that I hadn't really thought about the process, the building, what it takes, like how it actually takes to get to that place of like being at this sustainable level. And so after a year of entrepreneurship, and I did get great projects and valuable clients, it just wasn't what I'd imagined, and really, to be frank, enough to hold and sustain the business. And so I too had to make a decision to go back to work at the beginning of 2020. And it's so fascinating what you just talked about, the spiritual download,
Mhm.
because it was a voice like that. It was exactly like start start looking for a job. It was this thing that I was like, no, I could, it was like I was like, no, I could still blah blah blah. And it was
Mhm.
just a quiet, it was like that whisper Oprah talks about. The
Yes.
whisper. Start looking for a job, whatever, whatever. And then I was like, okay, I could look for a job, but I'm gonna look for like a totally different job. I'm not gonna look for a fundraising job. And it was like, look for fundraising. It was like, and the fundraising jobs kept coming, and I got a really great one, right?
Mhm.
And COVID happened, and
Mhm.
so much changed. And I thought to myself, spirit just be the universe, God, the name you want to call it, the divine, Christ, whatever the name that's
Mhm.
to you, have a power. And
Yeah.
it was just clear I was supposed to be back
Yeah.
at work. So I say that for all the people listening who are either entrepreneurs and struggling. Like
Mhm.
that can be part of the journey.
Mhm.
Say that to the people who go back to work like feeling like a failure. Like I know I felt like I failed.
Woo.
You know, I felt,
Girl.
ooh, I let myself down. And
Yeah.
I was like, no, but actually, this is the voice. Everything came together to support me.
Mhm.
I can regroup. And I feel like in a lot of ways, you and I talk about the fact that, there's always the opportunity to move forward, to start again, to begin.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so before we jump into leaps of faith and like planning to do the entrepreneurial path, I'm curious though what your return to work has been like.
Yeah. It definitely, for this particular recent job I ended up going back to, but I may also touch on, like, previous nonprofit experiences, because it's similar. It's not very different, but it was super hard the first year, especially, just trying to even adjust from being a full-time entrepreneur for 3 years, and going back into a nonprofit that has this fast pace, like masculine, go get it, do, move, energy. And you're just trying to, as soon as you, like, literally the first weekend, I'm already, you got to lead this and lead that. And like feeling the weight of the responsibilities and like trying to shift and adjust was hard enough. So I will say, I almost left several times the first year. Like, it was, again, my mind, my, conscious mind wanting to leave. But I had, because of the spiritual foundation and my commitment to being in tune with that, I did not make that decision because it wasn't time yet. And then once I got learned the organization and then started to realize, like, why am I really here? Beyond my own personal need for financial stability, but like even the work itself. Why am I here? What am I noticing? What's happening? And so, yeah, it became clearer and clearer over time, me being like one of the only Black staff, me being one of the staff who works directly with our clients, who's closer to the work that they get to kind of, as it moves up, get to go brag about, or get to go advocate and get funding for, that it just, holding the weight of all of that. And just like, it's been hard, dealing with the stressors of overwhelm, and just the dynamics of power and position, and being in meetings and rooms where everybody above you is lighter, and they get to decide what needs to happen, get to brainstorm and strategize, and then ends up, who's going to do the work? And that's just with the work, right? And then there's my own life, my own things that I have going on, that as a Black woman, and who I am, being the rock for, also my family, and having to also make space and time to still feed into my vision and my business, like all of those things. So I'm gonna pause for a moment just to see, because I know I said a lot, and I want
No,
to make.
that was a bunch of good stuff. Like things were just floating in my head as you were talking, because like the masculine energy was one thing that like really occurred to me, that I'm in this phase in my life where I just question everything. I'm just like, why do we do it that way? Just because we've inherited this model, because some man and patriarchy created systems that tell us that we have to have that kind of go, go, go. Like, we can't value self care. We can't trust ourselves. We can't, like, have like space to be creative. We have to like just keep pushing and producing. It's like an industry. We got to keep churning things out. And I
Mhm,
think like that is damaging to the staff, right?
mhm.
I think the nonprofit sector lacks heart. I think the nonprofit sector is replicating and becoming more of a corporate kind of model.
Yeah,
And that's not what it's there for. Like it's there to
right,
serve.
right.
You know?
Especially, sorry, not to
No,
interrupt,
no, I'd love to hear. Yeah.
especially when you're dealing with I'll say any nonprofit, but like when you're dealing with young people. And if the heart part, like you said, is about making sure that they have what they need and their voices are heard, or whatever that mission is, but it kind of like the higher it gets up, it's like the further you get away from the essence of why we're really doing this. If the mission is really about these things, but how does it look internally and not just on paper? And yeah, I think that's been like not just the current nonprofit I'm working with, but just in general, and other nonprofits I've been in. It's just We care about the money, the numbers, and less and less about people, caring, heart, like you said, and really embodying the mission,
Yeah.
and allowing that to show up in how you treat your staff, how you treat your constituents, or just so yeah, that's just another layer of it, or furthering what you were saying. So
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that's so interesting to me about that is, you know, when you serve young people, like you're saying, or you serve other vulnerable populations. So let's say, was talking about organizations that serve the homeless population, or
hmm
serve incarcerated folks or formerly incarcerated folks.
hmm
We're talking about people who, nonprofits that may serve people with mental
hmm
um,
challenges.
challenges, right? So, like, that's, this service industry is there for all those groups, right?
Yeah.
But if you have staff within that organization who are being mistreated, if you have staff who are burnt out, and that's another common thing is like burnout, meaning,
hmm
giving someone three, four jobs, like they have this one title and they're supposed to work 40 hours a week, but having the expectation of having them work 80 hours a week, which is like something that I've seen in at some nonprofits, like, we expect you to actually go beyond the 40-hour work week. And I've seen it not written. I've seen it like just understood that, this culture is very like much about sacrifice and everything that you have
Yeah.
serve, which is,
Yeah.
to me, comes from that white savior complex model of like saving everybody at the cost of everything. And
Mm-hmm.
then saying I'm a hero because I saved everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think is probably the foundation of the nonprofit sector, really, is like this model of saviorism, which is
Yeah.
not gonna do anything. It's not actually gonna derive like what you want, because
Yeah.
what you want is to build bridges of support and things that allow people to step into their own greatness and their own, and to really like, and it's not saving.
Right.
Something I've had to learn myself, but it's deep, because I think as long as the culture is based on saviorism, and it allows for us to sacrifice staff in the process, I think we're gonna continue to have, this imbalance and this toxic environment, and more than we see the whole unhealthy environments.
I agree. Like that mindset and that way of the saviorism, as well as the masculine machine production type of like the way in which you get to that saviorism. Those two pieces, if that's what is driving the organization, like you said, to be able to say, we look what we did. Here are the stories, and this is what um, but how are you preparing those folks, like you said, to be able to be resourced, or to even see them as resourced already, but giving them, tools to further empower themselves versus, the organization being the one to save and empower. And so, but that takes a whole big shift, from how things are typically, and like going back to what you said, the heart and caring, I think too, because I don't know how much organizations really care too, or what parts that they care about. And I'm not talking about, just my own organization, but just other ones where you see it's just like, we just need these numbers, and we just need to be able to mark this even if we didn't, you know, and then caring for staff,
Mhm.
care, and that culture, if care isn't there
Right.
too, just, you
Well,
know.
one thing that you said that I want to just talk about before we move into kind of the work you do around self-care and leaping and all of, that amazing work you do. But there's one thing that you said, seeing them as resourced already. And I think that that is where also the nonprofit culture really like suffers when it's not, when it's done in the current configuration. Because there are exceptional nonprofits. There are nonprofits that are really aware and alert. And so I'm not talking about every
Mhm.
single one, but I'm talking about the kind of more typical ones. But when you see the person that you are in connection with, the community, the individuals as resource, then I think that's a whole different conversation that you're having, right? And when when you see the staff too, who may come from those communities, who may not be as degreed, this is a big thing. I think people value certain degrees and titles, right?
Mhm.
Titles and degrees, but there are gonna be people who work in your organization who don't have those titles and degrees, but they have lots of experience,
Mhm.
lots of resource. They're fully resourced. And
Right.
I think that's a missing thing in the nonprofit industry at the moment, is to see
Mhm.
the folks that you're working with in the community as resource, but also seeing people who bring valuable lived experiences that aren't data points,
Yeah.
seeing them as a resource. So that jumped out at me when you were talking.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I actually got that concept from Keisha Mitchell, our coach. I just applied it to this, but she was sharing with me in terms of how to see your clients, as resource, coaching clients. But yeah, and then just to add to that before we move on too, I think the other piece is like how you see your staff not only as resource, but in what way are they resource, and what value do their unique gifts and ways that they contribute versus like expecting everybody to show up exactly the same. For example, like introverts versus extroverts, right? And I think like as an introvert, I may be more in the details of things, or I may need to see something written out, or I may need time to process and think about, how to bring forth something valuable versus like getting that last minute thing and being asked to kind of show up, or, whatever. Or even just in a simple as being quiet long enough to allow an introvert to step in and not think that they're not talking, but just maybe I'm thinking and y'all are talking, just pause and let me contribute. And so anyway, I don't mean to make this about me, but that's just an example.
That could be a whole conversation.
Yes.
Because that isn't my, I can think about a nonprofit I worked at years ago. So, not to be picking on the current ones, because we love,
Uh-huh.
you know,
Yeah.
our folks. But years ago, I worked at a nonprofit, and I've always been an introvert. I've always been an introvert. I'm a fundraising introvert, which is very interesting. So that means that I'm not up in people's face. I'm not talking all the time, but I am listening. And when I'm listening, I can key into things that are very important that extroverts can miss. So it's an interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember like my own way of getting to know people wasn't as networky. Let's just talk about, how the weather is. My way of even getting to know people on my team or donors is about really trying to find that point of connection that's really a real point of connection. You know, people don't get that. It can be like, well, you should just say, just talk. Or you're in a meeting and I'm silent because I'm listening and I'm taking it all in and I'm trying to think about like what's the best next step. And I may not actually have a verbal offering until maybe I think about it some more. And
Yeah.
again, you need to talk. You need to just talk in the meeting just because.
Whew.
It don't work. That has never worked for me. And I've just grown into being okay with that and actually saying, I'm an introvert.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna take me a little, I'm a process differently. I've come to that place where I just say it now.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's hard because this is the model.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be like this to be.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
And what it causes too, it could cause as well if someone else on the team who's like a peer staff, who is more of the extrovert, who is more of the talker, who is like what I've seen and noticed, that person gets a lot more praise and acknowledgement, and because they've talked a lot, because they've like, came up with a bunch of things to say and and in the media or whatever, and then that can just, create just this distance and separation, and just like, and then you can internalize. I've internalized it myself, like, oh, well, it means that I'm not contributing, or I'm not as, I don't get acknowledged, or, whatever. Not that I need that, but just noticing who gets acknowledged for the work, and who doesn't. And on top of that, knowing you're carrying a lot of this stuff, implementing a lot of this stuff, but because you may not talk as much in a meeting or a presentation or whatever, the way in which that is treated, can cause just added stress, and it's just an issue. So,
Speak. Because, yeah, I'm learning. And, as a manager too, it's interesting because when you manage people, you can be responsible for making people feel that way too. Because, what happens is when you are programmed in work and life that, okay, this is how you're supposed to show up, I have probably at moments been like, oh, that person didn't say anything in a meeting. Oh, and then I have to check myself. I have to. And so this, it's interesting because I think people think that some of these conversations are about blame, but for me, these conversations are about awareness. It's
mm-hmm.
about raising
Yeah.
awareness, and I have to do it myself. I
Mm-hmm.
have to sit and go, oh, that same thing that I've been talking about with me can be the same thing for my team members. So, like, I can have 4 people on my team and each of them show up differently. And I need to learn how to encourage like the greatness out of each person in their different ways. And learning that has been so helpful to me as a manager. And so I hope
Mm-hmm.
that people listening of all kinds of, titles and stations in life will get that this is about thinking about things with an
Yeah.
awareness, uh,
Yeah.
so that we can be different, so that we can like not treat introverts differently because that's their natural makeup.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that too, that's one thing I have been very grateful for, despite my challenges that I, have to navigate through, is the self-awareness that I've gotten about myself, and just being able to utilize and speak my truth more, or bring my voice forward, and not feel like I gotta fit into a particular box, but to really challenge that and say, this is who I am, and this is what works for me, and here's, and not to just stay in my own stuff either. There's opportunities to grow and stretch, but if it's like pushing a boundary, if it's like not totally who I am, being able to also learn to communicate that and share that, and help teach, what may not be in someone's awareness, to know. And so, and then for me to learn my own stuff and process through it, has been like, it's been a lot of that too, just the other work of self work.
Yeah,
So yeah.
that's important stuff. So